If you're someone like myself who you need a little bit of structure, not too much, not like an obsessive amount, but just enough to help you get started, to help you understand the world you're creating, the characters and how they're going to develop, and the overall message you're including in your work, then you may enjoy this video on the 10 things that I do before I actually start outlining my novel. And I'm going to put a disclaimer here. You don't have to do these 10 things. Every writing process for every writer is very different. And these are just things that I do that help me feel like I have a stronger understanding of my story and a stronger base point to kick off from before I start writing. Welcome back to the channel, but if you're new here, hi, my name's Amanda. I'm currently writing a dark romantasy story in a world of my own creation. I'm also someone who's always struggled with finishing a first or a second draft of a story, and that's always been because I didn't have a better understanding of things going into the story before I started writing. So once I started implementing these 10 steps, I felt much more comfortable, much more secure, with less uncertainty around what's happening, where is my story going, what plot points am I needing to hit, and things like that. I hope you find this video helpful if you're struggling with the same things, and let's just jump right into the video. Okay, I've got my notebook. Let's get into it. The first of the 10 steps is world building, and this part is really fun for me. I know there's a lot of people that don't necessarily like to world build. So if you are writing a story and it's set in contemporary times in, like, let's say Earth, for example, you may not have as much world building that you need to do. But for people that are writing fantasy or romantasy, sci-fi fantasy, other genres that fall into this category, world building is essential. Like, you have to do it because it opens up many different types of plot lines and directions your story can go when you have more understanding of the world you're creating. If you know the geography and how the world is broken down, if you know what the political landscape looks like, who's in power and why, what did they do in order to become in power, right? What is the currencies that are used in your world, as well as what's the magical systems look like? These are all different aspects of world building that really help to enrich the setting and the experiences of your character, and also the experiences your reader will have while reading about this new world. So some things I like to try to figure out with my world building is, aside from those elements, I want to know what the history is of the world. What happened 1,000 years ago? How can I use that in what's occurring now? And what's the timeline of events that have occurred since? What are some side plots that may have occurred throughout this timeline and this backstory that may become useful for my character to know in future chapters of the story, or for my reader to know in that case, right? This also opens you up to new ideas. All of this is just really helpful in order to understand the world your characters are growing up within, living within, existing within, what types of problems this world is experiencing that will affect your character. And a lot of the aspects with world building can be utilized in many different ways to create conflict for your characters and your stories. Next, I would choose the genre of my story. This basically gives me an overall view of what am I writing, what elements will I be needing to include to satisfy the genre conventions, and it also gives me more direction in what to do next in terms of what type of theme am I going to select and what type of focus is going to be on the character's emotional growth within my story. So the genre would be romance, for example, in my situation, but specifically I'm choosing romantasy as my genre. And romantasy opens me up to having two different plots as a main plot, a romantic plot, and a actionable plot. And if you were to choose something different, this may determine a different type of plot for your story. But knowing the genre is extremely important because then it helps you to further build out your character, their themes, the focuses and the elements that you need to include, and as well as things you may need to include that satisfy your reader expectations as well. Next, I choose the theme of the novel. This is important because it ties into the genre that you select. The theme is going to be what is the internal message that the character learns by the end of the novel itself. It's essentially the heart of your entire story. So it is that important. Your theme is very closely related to your genre that you usually select. And in my case, I'm writing romantasy, so my theme is based on love. And that is like a broad overall view of theme. You can take that theme and direct it even more minuscule and focus in on specific things within the category of love that you want your character to learn by the end of the novel. An example of this would be to take your theme, which in my case is love, and think of a direct message or something that could be learned by the end of the novel that your character would experience. And think of something that your character could learn from that overall theme by the end of the novel, something that means something to you as well as the writer. And in my case, when I think of love, I think of unconditional love versus conditional love, which would be someone learning the difference between needing to feel like they have to constantly show up or perform or provide value to be loved or worthy of love, learning that love is not meant to be conditional, it should be unconditional, and accepting that they are worthy to receive love without performance. I would then take that statement and I would make it more directly linked to your character. So in my case, my main female character is the one that is going to learn this message by the end of the novel. And she is now named Celine for the time being. It's a temporary name. The message I would say for Celine is Celine believes that love is conditional and that if she performs, she will gain love. By giving the message a more direct relation to your character, it gives you more of a feel of how that message is going to directly correlate to the character POV scenes for your character. Next, I would choose to write my character profiles. Now that I have all of the information that I need in order to have a small understanding of the character, this gives me a place to start. So I know the setting is a fantasy setting. The character is supposed to be the reflection of the world they grew up in. If you're writing a story that is a little bit more on the darker side and the setting is similar to The Witcher, for example, you wouldn't have a very soft character probably in that case, right? Because this character would be growing up where maybe there's lots of mistrust. There's lots of monsters. Life or death situations occur more frequently. Life is kind of rough, right? And it's set in more of a medieval type of location. So the struggles are different. So your characters should match your world building aspects to a certain degree. Of course, with all rules, they're meant to be broken. So you can break this rule if you like. You just got to make it work for your story. I know that the genre I'm writing is romantasy, so there should be both romance and action. I know the theme is based around love. I know the theme specifically related to my character is that she's going to learn the difference between unconditional and conditional love by the end of the book. And I know at the beginning, she will believe that love is conditional. That tells me some of the behaviors that she may need to do is going to be focused around showing value, right? So in that case, when I create my character profile, I take all of that into consideration and I create a profile based on what does she want? What's the goal that she has in place that she thinks that she needs? What does she actually need, which is usually the internal message that she learns by the end of the novel that she resists learning? What does she misbelieve about herself? It's a lie that she's formed from a past traumatic event that helps to push her to make really bad choices and resist learning the internal message. What's she most afraid of? And then after those elements, you can totally come up with it, whatever you want for your character profile. The sky is the limit, right? But based on the world that I'm creating, the world issues that are occurring, my main character should have some relation to those things. So her occupation and her goals should be built not only around the theme, but how that theme and how those goals relate to the issues occurring in the world. This gives you the ability to build out your character with more realism and build some backstory for the character also. So then I start to consider, what does my character's emotional arc look like? Remember, these steps are only supposed to help you with big picture ideas of your story and your characters and your world until you get to your outline, and that's when we start to kind of focus in on more specific things. So for a large picture for my character arc, I like to consider, how does her story start? How does it end? And what's the middle? If it's a character arc where the character changes progressively throughout the novel, they will either begin their story sad and the ending will be happy, or they will begin their story happy and their ending will be sad. You can also have a very flat character arc where the character doesn't change too much, but maybe their perspective of the world starts to adjust a little bit, or the world's perspective of them changes slightly. Other things that I like to know about my character in advance is, like, what are their relationship histories? What does that look like? How bad were the relationships? What are some things that they failed to learn in those relationships? Because that often comes up very frequently in their future journeys and learnings, is there's probably something that they have repeated in a past relationship that shows up in this current relationship. That's usually the theme that you see reoccurring, but there can also be multiple different things that this character needs to improve on if you want to so much as include all of it too. I also like to know whose voice is it that the character hears in their internal monologue. So often this is a parental figure, it could be a mentor, it could be someone that's impactful in their lives. But during the character's POVs, when they are in situations that are either particularly stressful, emotional, or physical high stakes, the character usually has an internal monologue that they kind of go through. This re-solidifies sometimes your character's choices and behaviors. And this voice is really important and really impactful to the development of your character's past, because this is the voice and the learnings, the wisdom or information that they are using to justify choices and actions at the beginning of the novel before they've started to change. Next, I like to figure out what is the trope that I'm going to be including within my novel. And I usually include multiple tropes, but I have a primary trope that I like to include as what the novel is filtered through. Online, it says essentially that a trope is a frequently used storytelling device, theme, or element that appears across various narratives. And the way I understand it is that a trope is essentially the filter that your story is focused through. It helps give direction and some semblance of structure when you are creating ideas around what events are occurring or how does the emotional relationship develop between the characters. For example, I'm writing romantasy. The trope that I have chosen for my romance is hate to love. This is the primary trope for my story. So with this trope, I understand that when I write the romance portion between my characters and how that develops across the broader arc of the novel, that means that the characters are going to begin in Act 1 by hating each other. There's going to be things that I need to do to solidify that hate and that misunderstanding. And then I have the middle section of the story where they still hate each other, but they're starting to slowly break and understand that the other person may not be as bad as they think, right? And then by the end of the story, there should be a romantic relationship that has built. They are now in love and they have seen each other in different lights and feel completely differently than they did at the start of the novel. That is what I mean by you're filtering your novel through the trope. It determines effectively the events that follow from the inciting incident. After that, I would go ahead and try to figure out a big image, broad picture of the plot lines in my work. So this will be dependent on the genre that you're writing within. Because I'm writing in romantasy right now, I know that I have two main plot lines. I have a romance plot line and I have a actionable plot line that both need to be front and center throughout the entire novel. They are essentially married together because it's romantasy. One cannot exist without the other. So in this case, first I would start with my romantic plotline because it is the most tied to the emotional arc of the character. The emotional arc is the snapshot, and I would expand that arc based on the trope that I'm including as my main trope, the theme of my novel, and my character's particular traits and personality, their behaviors, their fears, their want, their need, their mistrust or misbelief. What those elements do when they are actually combined gives you an idea of how the character might behave. The choices that they might make, right? If they're going to be more of a gray character or a non-gray character or a very dark character. And I would use these elements together to think through what the goal would be for my character for each act, or what would need to occur romantically to create an emotional change in the character. And for the actionable plot line, I take a issue that's occurring within the world I'm creating, and I essentially spread that out across an entire act and pose a question at the very front of the story. Let's use my character Celine and her actionable plot line as the example for this. So in the world I'm creating, magic is everywhere. There are two different systems. One system is almost extinct. It is considered a dangerous system, and people are afraid of this magic system. It's called divinity magic. My main character happens to have this ability. Because of that, she is treated horribly, and the world absolutely hates her to the point of threat of death. So in this case, her using her powers, it's basically non-existent. This would keep her from figuring out information about the issue up front and early on in the story. As we open in Act 1, I create the setup for my character around the situation. I pose a couple questions with information that is technically a lie that she has learned. And the reason that I pose the 2 lies, 1 truth, or 1 lie, 1 truth, 1 half truth rule is because if you think about it, over time, if there's an issue in your world and over time this issue is still existing, no one's found a resolution, or there's a prophecy that's been told long ago, after 1,000 years, things have a way of changing, right? People will have at this point passed down the legend by word of mouth. And every time you tell someone something and they retell it to someone else, that prophecy or that statement changes and adjusts. And by 1,000 years, you should have misinformation at this point, or blatant lies if the political powers in your world has chosen to go that route for mysterious reasons. So in my book, that is one of the cases. So I pose 2 situations that have both lies and truths that need to be discovered throughout the novel by my character. So in Act 1, my character starts off believing, 1, that the gods are dead, and 2, that the magical plague is caused by divinity magic. Going into Act 2A, my character is now just facing the same goal with the same skill set, the same knowledge, and the same tactics she would approach everything else. She's not seeking help, she's not making any headway, but she's trying out different things. Of course, she fails constantly. Towards the end of 2A, my character discovers across a series of events that her magical power actually is able to effectively work on things that have magical sickness. And in that case, divinity magic is possibly the only thing that does work. Because divinity magic is able to work, my character creates a new goal that she moves into 2B with and then begins trying again to solve the problem. This time around, because she has new information, she is able to actively work against the problem in different ways. And she has some successes. We lead up to the end of 2B, where there's another series of events in which my character has a major win, but then that leads to a major setback. And then this setback propels us into the climax of Act 3, in which my character is forced to make a decision, make a choice on several different factors. And she ultimately makes a choice that allows her to use her power for the better good to save people from magical plague sickness and effectively sacrificing something of value of herself. And at that point, we then reach the resolution. At the end of every act, there is a series of events that either proves my character's goal correct or proves her goal and her actions wrong. Every time the character has some sort of proof that she was right, proof that she was wrong, she has to create a new goal, or you're just doing the same thing and running in circles, which doesn't make sense, right? Throughout every single act, the questions that were posed in Act 1 are either proven true or proven false or proven as a half-truth as we get through the entire novel. And by the end of the novel, we have the full truth of the questions posed at the beginning. Those are built into the actionable plotline. I hope I didn't give too much away about my own novel, but at this point, I think it's helpful to showcase it in an actual story that I'm working on. Next, I take time to figure out what is the structure of the novel that I'm writing. And as you know, structure for your book is entirely up to you, the writer. There are so many different options out there. There is the 3-act structure, there's the 4-act structure, there are structures in which you write based on a circle format, there is linear structure. It just really depends on you, your characters, your world, and the story that you're writing. I have different ways that I use to select which type of structure that I'm going to be using in my story. For this current story that I'm writing, I'm using a 4-act structure, and my choices for choosing 4-act over 3-act is because of the amount of information, the amount of events and scenes that I'm estimating I need to include in order to reach the end result of my story. So when I think through the changes that need to occur across my characters, as well as the ongoing active events in the world that I'm creating that occur in the background, or if there's magical or world building information that needs to be brought across to the characters as we go through the novel, I have to account for that in terms of plot points and scenes as well. So that's why I choose 4-act over 3-act. It gives me more flexibility. It gives me more room to expand on the things that are important to me, as well as important to the overall revealing of the story for the reader. There's no right or wrong with the structure choice, although some people may say that there are certain structures that fit certain stories much better. If I was writing fantasy romance or a story in which there's not a lot of world building, I would just automatically choose 3-act structure. There's less plot points and I can just directly jump right into creating scenes. Next, I want to determine how many plot points I'm including in my novel. And this is based on the structure that I choose. If I choose the 3-act structure versus the 4-act structure, I'm going to have a different number of plot points. 4-act structure has an additional section. There is an Act 1, a 2A, a 2B, and an Act 3 that has to be considered when deciding on plot points. 2A and 2B both make up the middle of this section of Act 2, and in that case, there's extra plot points in these sections to help expand where needed. So I would have additional plot points that I need to consider. As always, with any writing rules, they are meant to be broken. Just because you are writing in a 4-act structure, that does not mean that you have to include every plot point under the sun. You can adjust the timing of plot points, the number of plot points. It's really up to you as a writer. In that case, you have total freedom. I definitely make sure I include the most important plots, which are the inciting incident, the first plot point, the first plot point turn in Act 1. In Act 2, I make sure to include the plot point number 2, plot point number 2 turn. I include a midpoint. I include a plot point number 3, plot point 3 turn, and then also the Dark Night, which is the scene in which the characters are betrayed. Act 3 contains the climax and resolution. And within those particular plot points, I can have much smaller plot points that lead up to those plot points, depending on what else is happening in the story, the character's arc, and things like that. Based on the number of plot points, I can determine what I need in terms of scene count. And I write, again, based on the number of scenes. I don't write with chapters any longer, and that's because it just feels more seamless to me. It makes more sense to have my key scenes figured out, and then building from each scene is how I connect the dots, essentially. And that's kind of the discovery part of my process, is connecting dots between each scene and each plot point. Each plot point can be considered as a scene itself, a major scene that occurs in your novel. So by knowing how many plot points I need in advance, I can determine how many scenes that I need. And if you build out these sections as like a box almost, and within that box contains 3 elements, 3 different scenes. You have your main scene, which is your main plot point. You have the setup scene, something that needs to occur before the plot point can occur. And then you have the aftermath scene. This is usually the follow-up to that plot point. What happens next? Does the character change their goal? Does the character come to terms with a new way, a new emotion or a way of feeling? Does the characters need to have a conversation now and discuss things? These are things that would naturally occur. And so when you think in terms of not cause and effect, but set up, actual scene, aftermath. So when you think of plot points in terms of scenes and then the scenes that are needed to support those major scenes, it becomes a very easy way to see how everything is connected, big picture. You can also understand what other scenes that you might need to include in order to link these scenes together as well. The last thing that I like to do is choosing universal fantasies. You don't have to do this step if you are following along with my 10 steps. These are things that I like to do because I like to know certain things before I start writing. So I have actually read the book 7-Figure Fiction, and if you haven't read this book before, I would recommend it. It is really helpful to make your book become a page turner for your reader and keep your reader reading. It's by T. Taylor. She explains that universal fantasies are basically scenes or situations that most people imagine but would never want to actually happen. And within that imagination is like this space where excitement exists and a different emotional feeling than they would have if this scene actually occurred in real life. So for example, if a 6'7" tall, dark, handsome guy snatched your bag on the side of the road, in real life, you'd be like, what the heck? In real life, you'd be like, oh my gosh, like I need to call the police. But if this happened in a romance book, you might be like, okay, that's the main lead right there. He's about to fall in love and he doesn't even know it. You know what I mean? So that's essentially what a universal fantasy is. It's a scene or a situation that would occur in a book that creates different emotional feelings in the reader that would be in real life horrible if it occurred, as a good example. So in Beauty and the Beast, some universal fantasies that you would find are going to be basically bully situations in which the Beast becomes a little bit of a bully to Belle. He doesn't start off immediately in love with her, and he treats her kind of bad. He throws her in a dungeon and locks her up, right? And sends her father away from her so she'll never see him again. The glow up scene in which Belle gets turned into a princess with a fancy ball gown, and then we get to see that the Beast is actually awestruck by her. He's like, wow, she's so gorgeous. You know, I noticed she was pretty earlier, but I didn't know she was that pretty until she had her glow up. Like, it's moments like that that this book talks about that are included in works that help your story to become more of a page turner and excite your readers. Because aside from writing a book for ourselves and being able to tell our character's story, we have to also care about our reader's experience. With these 10 things, you can essentially build out for yourself the large view baseline foundation of the novel that you're working on. It can give you enough information about your characters, your world, the elements that might need to be included in your story in order to get started with a stronger foundation. And this is the 10 steps that I use every time I start to write a new story or I take on a new project, and I feel so much better for it because I know I'm going to have less guesswork later on because I have better direction at the beginning. If you have a different set of 10 things that you like to do when you're starting a new novel, don't forget to let me know below. I'd love to know more about your own process. If you are a plotter or if you're a pantser, if you're a discovery writer, do you have anything that you do while you're writing that helps you later on in your process? Anyways, I hope this video was helpful to you guys. The next video that's coming out is going to be a outline my novel with me. I have already started writing this story, but I wanted to go back and create an outline with you so that you can see my entire process, how I think through my steps, and link my ideas together. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and a subscribe. And if you want to follow along my channel for more writing videos, don't forget to hit the notification bell. Aside from that, I hope you have a great week, happy writing, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!